Hello everyone. For today's lecture, we will continue to discuss learner language. In the previous lecture, we discussed learner language in terms of syntactical and morphological aspects. For this lecture, we'll focus on learner's language development in terms of vocabulary, pragmatics, and phonology. So I will discuss vocabulary first, followed by pragmatic and phonological aspects. Alright, let's start with learners' vocabulary development. If you're a language teacher, you may often hear from the low proficiency learners that they frequently say they lack vocabulary to express themselves. Vocabulary is commonly considered an important aspect for language communication. However, in the early 1980s, it was considered to be a neglected aspect of language learning. At that time, little research had investigated it. They focused largely on syntactical and morphological aspects of learner language. To date, more research has examined this area. Recent work on investigating learners' vocabulary development has produced useful information for understanding the vocabulary aspect of learner language. For instance, with regard to English vocabulary size, it is estimated that English has between 100,000 and 1 million words. For everyday communication, it requires about 2,000 words. If you're interested in general academic topics, you may need about 700 words more added to your 2,000 words required for daily conversations. For specialized and literacy topics, you will need a few thousands more. If you're interested in this area, you can find more information about English vocabulary using two big and common English corpora. The first one is the Corpus of Contemporary American English, and the second one is the British National Corpus. We have provided the snapshots of the websites to the corpora here, and the links could also be found on Blackboard for your reference. Okay, let's now think about how to learn new words. In your opinion, what does it mean to know a word? I'll give you some time to think. Usually, when you think about learning new words, you may think of the meaning of words. Actually, knowing a word can infer many things. For example, first, the knowledge of form, that is, it is about whether the form of a word is written or spoken, and also what part of speech a word is. Is it a noun or an adverb or an adjective, etc.? Second, the knowledge of meaning, that is, the concepts, reference, and conceptual links associated with a word is also important in knowing a word. Finally, knowledge of use, that is how a word is used in context, such as knowledge of collocations, or words that can go together, register, words that should be used in particular contexts, associations, and also frequency of words, how frequently a word is used in different contexts. Let me now visualize what I have just described about knowing a word in the following figure. In this figure, or we can call it a concept map, let's say you know the word animal, which is the main category. If you know what animal is, then you can think of an example of an animal, such as insect. And from this, you can think of different characteristics of an insect, such as it does not have backbone, its body consists of 3 parts, it has 6 or more legs, and it may have wings, etc. Also, if you know what insect means, then you can think of its examples such as ants, flies, and spiders. So you can see that the knowledge of a word can signify different associated concepts, as demonstrated in this figure. Now let's move to the process of learning vocabulary. Paul Nation, one of the most influential figures in the second language vocabulary research area, thinks that vocabulary learning requires effort by both the learner and the teacher. For words that we don't know, in order to guess its meanings in a context, one needs to know more than 95% of the words that are already in the text. That is, for new words, the context can help the reader to get the meaning. However, even when the context is useful, it can be inadequate or misleading in terms of helping the learners to guess the meaning of new words. Apart from the context, another factor that facilitates the learning of vocabulary is frequency. Research has shown that frequency makes a big difference in word learning. For example, words must be encountered many times before it is firmly established in memory. It is suggested that learners may need to encounter a word 16 times for it to be remembered. But it should be noted that different words are less or more common in different genres or discourse types than others, such as narratives versus academic texts. In other words, if you read certain texts that are of the same genre, the chances for you to encounter the same word are higher than when you read different types of texts. Besides frequency, cognates, or words that have the same origin, and borrowed words can also play a role in vocabulary learning. Some words are borrowed from another language, so if you know the original language, it will help you understand it in the second language. So let's pause for a minute. Can you think of any words in English that you think are borrowed from another language? Let's look at some cognates of English and French. An example of true cognates is information and information, which look identical in both languages and also refer to the same thing. A semi-true cognate is one where the French and English words are spelled the same, and part of the meaning is similar, but part is different. For example, the French word porc shares a definition with pork in English in that it refers to the flesh of a pig, but this word also refers to the animal itself in French, whereas in English you would have to say pig. False cognates are French words that look identical or extremely similar to English, but have an entirely different meaning. For example, coin in English would mean a form of currency, but in French it means a corner. So far, I have just largely focused on the vocabulary learning process. Now let's compare first and second language learning processes. In your opinion, how is second language vocabulary learning different from first language vocabulary learning? I'll give you some time to think about this. Okay, for first and second language vocabulary learning processes, there are often two main differences. The differences are in terms of quantity and quality of input. The quantity of input here means the frequency of encounters, that is, how many times you encounter a word, and the quality of input refers to how many clues that the context provides you with, so-called context clues, and how many times a word is repeated. Also, as I mentioned earlier, cognates and borrowed words can either facilitate or hinder second language vocabulary learning. So up to this point, I have discussed some aspects of learning language regarding vocabulary development. Before I start to discuss the next aspect of learning language, that is pragmatics and phonology, let me summarize what we've learned. First, we've discussed the importance of vocabulary for second language learning and communication, and briefly mentioned its research trajectory, in which the amount of vocabulary research has increased over the years. In the second part, we also discussed what knowing a new word is and what factors facilitate or hinder second language vocabulary learning process. In the last section, I point out two common differences between first and second language vocabulary learning processes. So now let's move to the second part of the lecture today to explore the pragmatic and phonological aspect of learning language.